Before 2022, Bakhmut was an unassuming industrial city in eastern Ukraine. It possessed no major military bases, no strategic ports, and was not a political center. Yet, for nearly 11 months, from July 2022 to May 2023, its name became synonymous with the most ferocious and bloody battle fought in Europe in the 21st century. Tens of thousands of soldiers from both sides would fall in its streets and surrounding fields. The central question that emerged from the rubble was why. Why did a city of seemingly minor importance become the epicenter of such immense human and material cost, a vortex that consumed soldiers, ammunition, and time on a scale not seen for generations? The context for this conflagration began in the summer of 2022. Following the capture of Lysychansk in early July, Russia had secured full control over the Luhansk region. However, the broader offensive in the Donbass had visibly slowed. The preceding months of high-intensity combat had inflicted heavy losses on its offensive formations, blunting their momentum. Simultaneously, Ukraine was beginning to receive and integrate larger quantities of Western-supplied weaponry, bolstering its defensive capabilities and enabling it to contest territory more effectively. Within this shifting strategic landscape, that Bakhmut began to acquire a new, unforeseen significance. Initially, it was a secondary objective, tactical, logistical hub, and an eastern gateway to the more strategically vital urban centers of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. But as the front lines elsewhere stabilized or shifted, Bakhmut gradually transformed into something more, a symbol. The city's escalation from a tactical waypoint to a symbol of national will was a gradual process, not a predetermined outcome. In the initial phases of the summer campaign, Bakhmut was not a primary strategic target for either side. However, as the months wore on and other fronts became deadlocked, it evolved into one of the few locations in the Donetsk region where Russian forces could maintain consistent offensive pressure. It became a foothold, a place to demonstrate continued progress, however incremental. Conversely, for Ukraine, it became a point on the map where a stand would be made. The decision was taken not to cede the city, to contest every meter of ground. It was at this juncture that Bakhmut's military value began to be overshadowed by its political and psychological weight. The battle was no longer just for a city. It had become a contest of endurance, a testament to the will of both armies to fight and to sacrifice, a defining feature of the battle's initial phase. During the summer and autumn of 2022 was the force leading the assault. Unlike other fronts where the regular Russian army was the primary combat element, the offensive against Bakhmut was spearheaded by the Wagner Group, a private military company. This fundamentally shaped the nature of the fighting. Wagner employed tactics centered on high intensity, continuous infantry assaults, often with poorly trained convict recruits. These attacks were characterized by a willingness to accept exceptionally high casualty rates. The approach was not designed for a rapid surgical breakthrough, but rather for attrition. The objective was to grind down Ukrainian defenders through relentless pressure, using human waves to probe defenses, identify weaknesses, and exhaust the garrisons through a constant cycle of combat, trading lives for incremental gains in territory. As winter descended upon the Donbass, the battle entered a new, more brutal phase. Temperatures plummeted, and the landscape transformed into a frozen, muddy morass. By this point, relentless artillery bombardment had reduced much of Bakhmut to a skeletal ruin. The city was no longer a functioning urban space, but a shattered labyrinth of collapsed buildings, craters, and debris. Every remaining structure, from apartment blocks to industrial workshops, became a fortified position, a miniature fortress to be fought for room by room. Fighting was pure, attritional warfare. Ukraine responded by rotating elite brigades into the city, seeking to maintain the defensive line with its most capable units. Their survival depended on a narrow supply corridor running west through the town of Chasiv Yar, a road that was under constant and withering artillery fire. The Ukrainian leadership articulated a policy of holding at all costs, committing significant resources to the city's defense. On the other side, Russian and Wagner forces continued their relentless push. Fighting for every meter of land, their progress measured in single buildings and city blocks. The battle had taken on the characteristics of historical meat grinders, a modern-day Verdun where strategic logic was subsumed by the sheer ferocity of the close-quarters combat. By early 2023, the physical city of Bakhmut had ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. An estimated 70 to 80% of its urban infrastructure had been leveled. It no longer held any logistical or tactical value as a city. Its road networks were destroyed, its buildings were rubble. All that remained was its meaning, the political and spiritual significance that both sides had poured into it. The last supply route into the city for the Ukrainian defenders was a perilous artery of death, constantly targeted by artillery, drones, and direct fire. Faced with encirclement, Ukraine's forces gradually shifted from a static defense to a more resilient mobile posture, focused on inflicting maximum casualties on the advancing forces while preserving their own. The battle was no longer being fought for control of terrain, for the city itself was gone. It was now a raw contest of resolve, a struggle driven by the fact that neither side was willing to be the first to retreat and concede the symbolic loss. On May 20, 2023, the leader of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, declared that his forces had established complete control over the ruins of Bakhmut. For Russia, this marked the first capture of a major urban center in many months. A tangible, if Pyrrhic victory that could be presented as a significant achievement. The Russian flag was raised over the westernmost destroyed buildings, signifying the end of the nearly year-long struggle for the city proper. For Ukraine, the loss of the city was a blow but not a strategic catastrophe. Its forces conducted an organized withdrawal from the final pockets of resistance, avoiding a large-scale encirclement and preserving the core of their fighting units. In the final weeks of the battle, Ukraine had already begun launching localized counterattacks on the northern and southern flanks of the city, successfully pushing back Russian forces in some areas and complicating their hold on the wider region. Bakhmut had fallen, but its capture did not translate into the strategic breakthrough that had been the offensive's original larger goal. A strategic assessment of the battle reveals the immense price paid for a symbolic objective. Rise. From a purely military perspective, the Russian advance was halted at Bakhmut. The capture of the ruined city did not open the gates for a wider offensive toward the key cities of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. The cost in manpower and materiel, particularly for the Wagner Group, staggering and would have significant repercussions in the months that followed. For Ukraine, the battle was also immensely costly in terms of experienced soldiers and equipment. However, by holding the line for so long and inflicting such heavy losses, it blunted the Russian winter offensive and maintained the strategic initiative, setting the stage for its own planned counteroffensive elsewhere. In terms of the nature of warfare itself, Bakhmut demonstrated that the conflict had entered an extreme phase of attrition. It proved that in modern war, symbols, narratives, and political will can become objectives as powerful and as costly as any physical territory on a map. Historically, the battle for Bakhmut did not decide the outcome of the war, but it will be remembered as a place where human will, endurance, and the capacity for destruction were tested to their absolute limits. The fall of Bakhmut did not end the fighting in the Donbass. The war did not pause. The front lines simply shifted and the artillery duels continued. But the battle left an indelible mark on both armies, forcing them to reassess their tactics, manpower, and strategic objectives. It was not an end, but a stark and brutal warning. It signaled that this conflict had the potential to be a very long war of attrition, one where victories are measured in meters of scorched earth, and the human and material price to be paid would only continue to increase as the fighting dragged on.